I'd like to show you why you should think like a fox in today's pretty volatile environment. The second thing is to talk about the global economy, because we're all affected by the world economy, using this technique, and then talk about the possibilities for South Africa. I guess the story starts in the year 2000. I was sent a thesis by a young woman called Chantal Ilbery. She was a student at UCT, and her thesis was on scenario planning. And she said two things in her thesis which really appealed to me. The first thing she said was that scenario planning was far too academic a methodology to appeal to ordinary businesses, and I could vouch for that. I used to, in the 1980s, compare the Anglo scenarios on the future of the global economy with the Shell scenarios in London. And when I went and to the London offices of Shell and said to the concierge, "Can I see the scenario planning team?" he said, "You mean the priests of the Nile?" In other words, they were regarded as an outfit of futurists who are completely divorced from operational management. So what Chantal and I have done to try and address this problem is two things. We now add flags to the scenarios. So we don't just say the future can go off in that direction or that direction or that direction. We feel very strongly you've got to give people the flags which would suggest that the future is changing from this path to that path. And indeed what we found recently is that a lot of companies are more interested in the flags than they are in the scenarios themselves. And then the second thing which we've done is that we believe that as a flag goes up, you've got to give a company a feeling for what your personal probability is for that scenario. You can't just say it's more or less likely. They want to know that it's 20% or 30% or 50% probability. And obviously we qualify that by saying that our probabilities are subjective, and that if other people have different ideas on the probability based on the flags, they're quite entitled to their opinion. I personally believe the future only happens once. It's not like a laboratory experiment. And secondly, that a lot of very critical events are determined more by emotion than by logic. And therefore, it is very difficult to be scientific in terms of applying probabilities to the future. The second thing that Chantal said is it's no good just playing scenarios. That basically is daydreaming. What you have to do is to look at the consequences for you as an individual or for your business, and then decide based on the probability and impact of that scenario whether you're going to do something now to avoid the threats or to capture the opportunities, or whether you're going to have a contingency plan. But what you can't do is do nothing, because that's the whole point of the process is to prepare you for the future. And therefore, we feel very strongly that you have to connect all the dots from looking at the scenarios, the flags, the probabilities, and then the impact, and then deciding what you're going to do. You have to go through the whole technique. I said to Chantal, why don't we write a book? It took us 5 months, and we published it in June 2001. And we called it The Mind of a Fox, because we wanted to get across to people that thinking like a fox is very much like being a scenario planner. In fact, there was a Greek poet called Archilochus who in 650 BC said the fox knows many things, whereas the hedgehog knows one big thing. Now, why he chose foxes and hedgehogs, heaven only knows. And he's been dead a long time. When a hedgehog puts an idea on the table, a fox will naturally think about the exact opposite. Foxes look at the environment just like the animals to see how it's changing, and particularly to look for the flags which would say that the environment's changing. Companies need both types. You need the visionary hedgehogs, but you need the contrarian foxes. And you need to adapt your strategy as the future unfolds if you want to have a long life as a business. So that's why we wrote the book. When it first came out, it wasn't that well received, but something happened which turned it into an overnight hit, and it was the best-selling book of any title in South Africa in 2002. And in 2003 it was number 2 because Harry Potter was number 1. So what was the event that propelled it into the bestsellers? It was 9/11, because what we decided to do in the book was publish a letter to George Bush in which we said that part of his legacy as President of the United States would be determined by the speed and quality of his response to certain extreme futures that might come in his direction. And we nominated as his number one extreme future a massive terrorist strike on an American city, which would completely transform his presidency and possibly lead America into a gilded cage where it shut itself off from the rest of the world. And of course it happened 3 months after we published the book. Thank heavens we didn't get it exactly right. We didn't have planes flying into buildings. If we had, I wouldn't be here at Regenesys. I'd be in Cuba. So you'll never capture the future precisely. But if you have a vague success, that's good enough. But where we did get it exactly right was in the flags we chose to nominate that extreme future as his number one threat. Our second book we called Games Foxes Play, because as important as the macroeconomic flags are, the other flags, if you're a leader of a business, you have to look for are those that are changing your business game. Because one of the biggest things about business is that the game changes big time in a period of 5 to 10 years. It's not like sport. I mean, sport, tennis, cricket, rugby, golf, whatever sport you choose, hasn't changed much in the last 50 years in the way it's actually played. But business changes dramatically in a period of 5 to 10 years. And if you don't actually keep up with those changes, you really can go down. The more successful you are, the more blind you are to the changes that are taking place in your business game. And that's why we devote a lot of time at a strategy session to looking at the flags that are changing your business game. The third book we wrote, what we call the Fox Trilogy, now because all 3 books are in one, we called Socrates and the Fox, because Socrates was a philosopher who, when he came up to you, he said, "Why do you exist?" And we feel that is the question that you must ask yourself in any strategy session. Why do I exist as an organization? And what am I going to do to change if the reason for my existence is being undermined by the changes in the market? And this has become a big question in light of the tough economic times. Because what we found with most of our sessions around the world is that companies have to offer one of 2 things to really, maintain their profitability. They've got to offer value for money at a particular price. In other words, Apple's iPhone 5, it's an expensive object, but Apple has such a good brand that people see it as value for money. Or you've got to offer the cheaper alternative, like Mr. Price. I mean, if you're a business, you want to grow your business, you've got to come up with a completely new product and a completely new market, or you've probably got to take somebody else's market share. And therefore, you've just got to be more intelligent than your competitors. We're not hedgehogs. We don't say to our clients that's the only global scenario. There is one other which we call a mainstream scenario. We call it ultraviolet, a UV. It's where the old world economies like America, Europe, Japan have the long U, and the new world economies, China, India, Africa, South America, have a V-like recovery and grow at least 3 times faster than the old world economies. So what do we say to our South African clients about South Africa? Well, we offer them 3 scenarios. The first one we call Premier League. And we chose that term very carefully because the world is a highly competitive place. And if you're not competitive, you go down. You go down big time. The second flag is around pockets of excellence. This country has amazing pockets of excellence still. World-class pockets of excellence. And if we can use those pockets of excellence to replicate around the country other pockets of excellence, good flag. If we dumb down those pockets of excellence, terrible flag. I mean, schools, we've got 28,000 schools in this country, of which 5,000 are reasonable to excellent and 23,000 are dysfunctional to shocking. How are we going to use the good schools to raise the standards at the bad schools? What we mustn't do is dumb down the good schools. The third flag is around a balanced economy, an outward economy that earns us foreign exchange to pay for our imports, an inward economy that provides jobs. As far as the outward economy is concerned, you have to play to your strengths, and there are three spaces we can dominate. Resources, we're still a resource-rich nation. In fact, we're rated one of the most resource-rich nations in the world if you exclude oil. So we must now get our act together again in the mining industry. The second space is tourism. We're a cheap country. We immaculately held the 2010 Soccer World Cup. We all came together under Sid Blatter. And then we fell apart as soon as he left. The third space is being the gateway into Africa, the place to start chasing the V. That's why Walmart has bought 51% of Massmart. It's not to just access South African customers, but to go up Africa. We are, with our banking system, stock exchange, we've got all the accoutrements that modern companies want. We're the place to start chasing the V in Africa. On the inward economy, and if it's the only thing you remember from tonight, it's this. We have one flag, and that is our attitude to small business and entrepreneurs. We looked at the two largest economies in the world, China and America. They can't be more different to one another except for one thing. They both have a passion for entrepreneurs. Jacob Zuma, instead of talking about creating 5 million jobs by 2020, should have said we're going to create 1 million new businesses by 2020. Because honestly, that is the only way you're going to create 5 million jobs. No other way. And so we've got to find a way of now creating new spaces within our economy for small business. So I hope I've persuaded you that it is worthwhile being a fox. Even if you're a hedgehog, you can surround yourself with foxy advisors.